And we are live. I have the great pleasure to introduce Jessica Nemmers, who is the Chief Security Officer for Elevate. Thanks, Jessica, for joining today. Much appreciated. How are you?
Thank you, David. I'm great. How are you doing?
Good, good. So I mentioned, just a few seconds prior to this hitting the show button here, that you've done quite a few of these. So I'm giddy with excitement to cover a lot of the topics today. Hopefully, we'll cover in such a way that it makes sense and it's coherent. So why don't we get started by just providing us a quick background on how you got to such a senior role in cybersecurity. You've had quite the journey.
I have. Yes, my name is Jessica Nemmers, and I actually came from a non-traditional background. This is my third career, I suppose. But my first career was as a professional ballerina. So I am known in the Dallas-Fort Worth area as the ballerina turned CISO. When our company went bankrupt, I was suddenly out of a job. So I ended up by happenstance into electronic data systems, EDS, and working on an arts project in a technology company. Fell in love with technology, fell in love with data centers, and throughout my career, just kind of moved
Jessica, you fell
from
in
there.
love with data centers.
Yes, I did. I was just talking about that to somebody yesterday, and they're like, "Really?" I said, "Oh,
Yeah,
I
especially
love them."
yeah, especially coming, from such a artistic background, which is really remarkable. So what was appealing in specifically in IT that you liked so much?
I liked the challenge of it. I entered IT when IT was still very much a mystery to people and really new back in the 90s. So I was able to witness us being able to get email on a Palm Pilot at the time that turned into a cell phone. And then just advances in technology. I just never, every time I thought, well, maybe I should do something else, something new in technology would come along, and I just loved it. So I just stayed with it.
And but from IT again, so a couple of transitions here, right? From IT transitioning to specifically to cybersecurity, which cybersecurity wasn't even a thing back then. Um, what was that like? And I think that you mentioned a couple of times during your past interviews that you were reluctant to mention that you were a ballet dancer because it had kind of maybe negative connotations in terms of the ability to perform, but it's not so much it is today. Like it's very different today, right?
It's really different today. So, yeah, definitely. I was worried about credibility. So, I was up against a lot of men who were in the military. So, I kind of had that ex military component. Coming out of an arts background, I was worried that they would say, you can't do this job because you don't have the experience that we do or that traditional path. So that it's definitely changed. And more, we're seeing a push to bring in folks into cyber from non-traditional backgrounds because it just brings diversity of thought. So that was really kind of different. And then when I moved into cyber full time, that was really at the beginnings of phishing. So it was more social engineering. And that was a really interesting challenge for me. How do you fight the bad guys when they're really using psychology and not pure hacking techniques? And I really wanted to see what I could do around that.
Yeah, and when I think ballerina, it's always springs to mind the that poster that I've seen, basically of ballerina with this perfect standing on the toes, on the tiptoes, and then what you don't see is when she takes off her shoes, there's like there's two photos where it has like band-aids and all that stuff, and it's kind of the indication that you don't see the hours and hours of training. And I don't know if you've seen that, but it's very impactful. And there are some very much transferable skills, right, between kind of the two disciplines, even though they, on the surface, looks very far removed, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, we Glenda Brown, she passed away recently. She's a choreographer in the Houston, Texas area, and she has a wonderful saying about if you need somebody to do the job, hire a dancer. she talks about the fact that we're very used to rejections. So we have pretty thick skin, and we would audition 200 people for one part. So there was no guarantee you would ever get the part, but we don't back down. We are very disciplined. So it did take a ton of discipline to perfect the art. And then we're used to pain. I mean, I lived in pain every single day. And yes, my feet look like hamburgers by the end of the day.
I'm sorry, I'm laughing, but it's so impactful. I don't know if anybody asked you that before, but it's, so now the fact that you used the pain, I guess it should be almost a prerequisite to first of all to be an executive. I think you have to follow adversity a little bit, and then definitely in security, there's a lot of pain involved sometimes in security where you have to make decisions and so on.
It can be, yeah, definitely. And just that the thick skin, I attribute a lot of my thick skin to coming up in my IT background through Perot Systems at the time. And again, a lot of ex-military. There was no crying in baseball, that famous line. There was no crying in IT, and that really helped me kind of get the thick skin that I needed to take that next step into cyber. So. But we do, CISOs have to make really tough decisions, and we also have to, overcome a lot of rejection. There are other priorities with the business other than funding your cyber program, so you have to be very influential. And I always talk about sales training too. So luckily I did some sales training early on because I spend a lot of time selling our board and our executives on why they want to invest in our program.
Yeah, and it's so interesting because when we look at the profession itself, we don't necessarily think about it as multidisciplinary, but there is just so many aspects and facets of being an executive in this particular role. As you mentioned, it's selling, is being able to be articulate, translating the ideas to the business, be able to kind of quantify. So it's all about analytics as well, like to quantify the risk and associated with certain risk to the business and the money need to spend. There's just so many. It's very it's not traditional to think about that way. What are kind of the skill set required? So in your mind, you were given a chance. You were coming from a different industry, and you were very successful. You giving back to the community, you co-author a book and so on. Like, and we'll talk about it a bit later on. But why do you find it so difficult for people today to get into this industry? Even people that are in IT, not necessarily in cybersecurity, but trying to get into the space, there's just so much. I don't know what to say. Just no one really gives a chance. Most companies hire for the job you had as opposed to the job you want. Why
Correct.
do you think that is?
Yeah, so I call it the cyber catch 22. So you
Hmm.
can't get a job without the experience, but you can't get experience unless they give you a job. So I'm very passionate about opening up opportunities, whether they are internships or, work studies or something, some way to get all these talented folks who want to come into cyber time to actually get hands on keyboard and get the experience. I think most companies have very few dollars to spend. So if they are going to hire someone, a cyber expert, or 3 members on a cyber team, they want someone with 10 to 15 years of experience in their CISSP and all these other certifications because they need them on the ground running. The problem is that we've all become top heavy. So now everybody is needing more people. We keep talking about the skills gap. And I'm out there talking to these industries in certification programs, boot camp programs, college programs. We have a wealth of individuals out there ready to get into this job. And so there isn't a skills gap. I think there's an understanding gap of what skills we need and what we're willing to do to bring them into the company. And it's hard. It's harder work on your cyber team to bring an entry-level person up. But I truly believe if you bring them in, they tend to be more loyal to the company. They're going to come in frankly, on your budget, they're going to come in at a lower price point, but they're also going to come in with new, fresh ideas that we definitely need in our industry.
Yeah, definitely. And it's a matter of national security. I mean, we're the backbone. The industry is the backbone of the U.S. and we require that defense. So you're right. There's not so much skill gap. It's more of a I wouldn't say maybe experience gap, but just giving the opportunity to these younger people, or people just for they're coming from the various different industries. I've seen one comment from a CPA in one of the interviews you've made online, asking whether there is an age limit or age gap or something like that. And again, it's all perception. I've seen very successful security analysts. They're in the 50s and they just transition 3 years ago, when they were 47, and they're doing a phenomenal job,
Absolutely.
and with the skill set that they've acquired. And so, what's also interesting about your background is that you got your stripes working at a company that's manufacturer, which is again, it's even more challenging. It's different than working in financial sector, fintech that you are today, because you know uh, security is paramount, and there's budget for it, and people get it. Manufacturing is very different, right? It's always seems like a cost center, and every dollar you spend is you taken away from manufacturing and whatever it's widget or whatnot. Tell me, what was that like, and how did you manage to um, get that going for you and create that program where it wasn't trivial as a kind of a manufacturing company to do so.
Yeah. So I had some great leadership at the company, and I was very, very blessed to have the opportunity to build that program from scratch. So that's most CISOs don't get to build from greenfield. I love manufacturing. I think it's so interesting to be in a mill watching something actually being made here in the United States, and the whole supply chain part of it. I think Colonial Pipeline and that ransomware attack really shed light on the challenges in the manufacturing sector. Of course, everybody started talking about the wake up call with the hack on Colonial Pipeline, and I was looking around like I've been phone's been ringing for years. I've been preaching this for
I'm
years.
sorry, I'm laughing, but it's so true, isn't it? Just it's like it's almost like what's under the lamppost, for that moment. We all can say the same thing until something happens, and everybody is like wakes up and just says, "Oh well, now it's important." No, I'm sure you've been harping on that point for a while.
Oh, completely. And they were getting so tired of hearing me talk. But I think one of the things that I did was kind of leverage what was happening out in the world. So there was another very, very large ransomware attack back in I think it was March of 2018 or 2019, that didn't make headlines, but for us, it was in our industry. So it was a way to show my executives at the manufacturing company, hey, look, it's starting to hit our sector, and this is what it could look like. And so then we really started talking about dollars. What would it look like if it hit this one mill and it brought the mill down for a day or a week? But what if it hit our entire company, kind of like Colonial Pipeline? What would it do to our share price? Things like that. And really looking at, number one, the risk, but also the impact, and helping them understand without using fear, uncertainty, and doubt. FUD. We all CISOs, we need to watch our FUD here, but without using FUD, I was really able to tie it to real world things happening. Unfortunately, at Colonial, they weren't able to kind of foresee that happening to them, but it was pretty classic. And again, with the manufacturing, it's also a challenge because you're managing a business network, but you're also managing an operational technology network with machinery that was not built for cyber. And it was built a very long time ago. So some of these mills are very old, but they can still be hacked. And that's a real challenge for
Yeah,
security
absolutely.
professionals.
And you mentioned that you like the kind of the analogy for protecting a house, which makes it a little easier for the executives to understand. So how do you kind of have these as similarities any for cybersecurity and protecting your house?
Yeah, so that I just kind of happened upon it one time when I was prepping a board presentation, and I thought, what can we all relate to? And unfortunately, at the time, I was burglarized in my own home. So luckily, my
No
security
way.
defenses, yeah, he was
Wow.
only in my house for 90 seconds, which the alarms worked, everything I had cameras, and long story short, we ended up apprehending him. Neighbors all got together and shared.
No way.
He was
Wow.
on parole, so he's back in prison. But that helped me understand, you know what? I'm going to look at this because I was planning defenses in my home just like I was doing at work. So when I was prepping that presentation, I actually did a cartoon kind of picture of the house and started talking about it. Our fence was the firewall, and talking about security drills or fire drills that we have for our family in the house. That's our security awareness program. And looking at where are we storing our valuables, our most, our precious jewels in the house, into a safe. So that's really talking about network segmentation. So I was able to kind of break down those areas in a way that everyone understands. And again, we all want to protect our homes, protect our families, and protect our assets. That's the same thing. You want to protect your company, your customers, and your data. So that seemed to have really resonated well with them.
And also from what you mentioned, which is pretty amazing, you built the entire kind of security program at that company. And I'm thinking to myself, back in the day, there weren't, manuals. Like how did you know how to do this? This is not trivial. Again, you kind of glanced over it. Okay, yeah, I built the security program in that company, and it was great because I was privileged enough to create something that I wanted. How did you go about doing something like that?
Yeah, so that was the challenge. And so it's kind of like, again, investing in your home. If you are on a tight budget, what are you going to invest in to give you the most bang for your buck and lower the risk? So as these risks emerged, we were addressing them. So our biggest risk at that moment was phishing. We were getting phished constantly, and without that education, people were clicking on phishing emails. We had business email compromise. So people were trying to get our employees to wire transfer money to a hacker versus the right person. So that was our first investment, is the security awareness program. And then you just kind of go through, and I always preach, it's got to be right for that company, each for the size of the company, the industry that they're in, and the threats to them. So in manufacturing, you're going to have stronger threats to your infrastructure versus a fintech company that I'm with now. That's our threat is data, our customers' data, PII. We have a lot of sensitive data on our customers. So it's really taking a look at your biggest threats and your biggest risks to the company, and then applying your investment to those areas. You can't do it all at once. So it's definitely a methodical, layered approach. And we bumped our heads a little bit. I had some scraped knees and toes as we were going along. It wasn't as smooth sailing as
I
thank you,
know, but
thank
you
you, thank
mentioned,
you,
oh, I
house
built the security
recipes. So,
program.
yeah,
I wanted to like just dive a little deeper because it's not trivial. It's a super tough thing to do,
yeah,
especially when because you're paving your own road, basically, you're paving your own
yeah,
path. And it's a double-edged sword. You also have the ability to define that exactly for what you want. Coming in for something that somebody else has built, but also you have to build it, and there's some challenges there. um, so speaking of investment, there are companies today that consulting companies that do they're trying to quantify the risk, so you have the ability to know where to invest. You have limited budget and essentially unlimited risk, and then you have to know where to where to invest in what to protect and what type of products and solutions and so on and so on. um, how do you approach that today? Again, you're in a fintech space which has probably a larger budget, but it doesn't matter, you still have limited budget, you still have to justify spend. So what's your process look like today?
Okay, yeah, that's so it kind of goes back to that bang for the buck. And I think one of the things that we CISOs have to remember is about not only technology debt, so tech debt, but also full utilization of your solution. So you want to make sure that the solution that you're buying doesn't overlap something you already have. And I think early on, a lot of us were like, ooh, new shiny objects and all these new capabilities. So it's really understanding what does that capability bring to your company and what risk is it addressing. And we've made decisions where some of the vendors are like, you're crazy if you don't purchase this product. But I know at that moment, purchasing the product, we wouldn't use all of it. So we're leaving money on the table and wasting everyone's time. So they're hard decisions, but again, I think it's always back to the impact, the bang for the buck. Does it lower the risk of business disruption? I can't lower the risk of a cyber attack. It's going to happen. So I'm going to lower the risk of the business disruption when it happens. And if it really doesn't, or it will lower the risk, but it would take all the stars and the moon and all these crazy things aligning to make it happen, then that's not your time to invest in that solution at the time. Wait till later, or wait till a different time in your maturity to look at it again.
Yeah, interesting. And you mentioned that it's a matter of not when, but if. So it's going to happen no matter what. How do you prepare for that? I know, coming back to the example with the house, how you trained, you can train your family to, to what to do in emergencies and so on. Do you do that today with your company?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Not only with social engineering, but also with incident response preparedness. Everyone should have a cyber incident response plan. It doesn't have to be 25 pages. Outsource it, bring someone in to help you write it, bring someone in put them on retainer to help you. If you are hit, you need to have that, I call it the bat phone. You need to have that bat phone number ready, and the knowledge of who to call to help you out. Companies, as big as these attacks are, you can't do it by yourself. And legally, you don't want to. So we do a lot of preparation. Tabletop exercises are really important. Pen tests, security assessments, any data that you can get from the outside in is very helpful for you to prepare for that day that it happens. But I always talk to executives and tell them this tabletop is so important because we need to be having this conversation right now and not when we're in the throes of a cyber attack. That's a really tough time to be making decisions. So we want to have it all laid out in the plan.
Yeah, and it's also, relates to the kind of the bat phone example you mentioned. You want to have a prior relationship with that service provider that potentially can help you at a time of crisis prior to. So the first phone call is not the one when you call for help and they have to figure out what your environment looks like, what your critical applications look like. All that needs to be done prior to, right? So this is something that I'm assuming, established already.
Absolutely. And I think the reality is with so many cyber attacks happening, especially, this year, they're not available. So if you don't have them on some sort of retainer, and there are cost-effective retainers, they don't all have to be, hundreds of thousands of dollars. But if you do not have someone on retainer, you're going to end up waiting 3 to 5 days to get someone because they're already working on so many other cyber attacks. So that's something that a lot of companies are surprised that it's not just pick up the phone and someone will be there. And when you're completely down, and you have dollars per hour, being down 3 to 5 days could mean companies going out of business at that point.
Yeah, it's really amazing the number of ransomware attacks that happens almost a daily basis to various companies in the U.S. It's just staggering, and it kind of leads me to the next question. Is you talked about the landscaping changing around around the adversaries and their modus operandi, like the MO, how they operate, who they attack, and so on. And we talked about a bit about the kind of Russian hackers and so on. So maybe let's chat a bit about that. What changed in the past, I would say 12 months since the pandemic hit, around the nature and the severity of attacks, to corporations.
Yeah. So it 2020 was a really, of course, impactful year with sending everybody home. So now we have all these workers that are at home. We've got added risk. I can't secure everyone's home network. We don't know, what you're clicking on. Your child is possibly sitting right next to you or getting onto your machine. We lost a lot of control when we had complete remote workforce. But I think the biggest thing was that aha moment with SolarWinds. We had seen supply chain attacks happening, but not at that scale. And the fact that they were able to infiltrate government agencies and very large corporations. And it made a lot of companies feel like, wait a minute, you're the one sending us your updates. We're using your software and your software has been compromised. And the fact that it was SolarWinds, that's controlling your network. So I think that was a big aha moment and the next step up in these attacks. And then the ransomware demands were going out the roof. Millions of dollars opposed to hundreds of thousands of dollars opposed to thousands of dollars just a couple of years ago. And then we saw the Exchange attack in 2021 on on-premise servers. So again, that's Exchange being weaponized, something that everyone uses. And the reality of these companies don't have the bandwidth or the manpower to patch or remediate against these attacks. And then on top of everything else, not only are they demanding ransom, they're still breaching that data and holding it out for ransom too, because companies have gotten a lot smarter. They're doing backups and they say, fine, we'll just restore from backup. But if they have your data, your sensitive data, and they're holding it for ransom too, that's one of those things. The genie's already out of the bottle, and companies are really stuck at that point. You cannot recover from that. You have to risk exposure or else pay the ransom. So it's double and triple ransom at this point, and it continues to step up. It's not getting better; it's getting worse.
Yeah, and so let's talk a bit about that. So there's kind of almost things we talked about, throughout the years of how to mitigate risk at large enterprise and medium-sized enterprise, and not all of it involves large amount of spending, right? So a lot of it is common sense, like network hygiene,
Mm-hmm.
two-factor, just employee education and so on. Why are we still so vulnerable? It seems like we're not learning from our mistakes. It's even companies that got hit by ransomware. Sometimes you hear about them getting hit again after 6 months. It's almost like they've just not learned the lesson, even though they've been hit.
Right.
Are we? They're saying the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again. Are we not? Are we insane, or it's just something that we're not learning from our mistakes?
Yeah, I think it's a little of everything, and
It's a good answer.
especially city governments like Baltimore back in 2018 got hit twice. Actually,
Yeah.
now they've been hit 3 times. Uh, so I'll take city government for example. The funds are limited. So if your citizens are not voting on releasing funds for your IT department, these folks are not able to fully patch. They can't fully remediate everything, upgrade all of their operating systems. And again, some of these machines that they're using are application locked, and that takes even more investment. So a lot of it's money, a lot of it's manpower. But the hackers do know when they come in and they attack, they have a pretty good idea whether they're going to be able to remediate quickly enough or not. I think the situation with the Exchange on-prem servers, the government actually authorized the FBI to hack into private companies' servers to remove the back door.
Wow.
A lot of them probably didn't realize that the Chinese threat actors had left a back door in to get into the server at another time. So again, I think most of it is really, do we stop spending at all, on everything in our business operations and turn it all to IT and bump up our infrastructure and hire people and make sure that we're all buttoned up and that we've thoroughly cleaned our house, back to the house analogy? or do we try to kind of clean as we go, limp along, but keep business running? And it's a really hard decision. And I feel for every company that has had to face this decision right now.
Yeah, and there are just so many more that are not even, they're just okay. They have to announce and by law, but I mean, it's just so many that we don't know anything about. And it's just crazy to me that 2021, there's still companies out there that still have on-prem exchange. I
Oh yeah.
mean,
Well, I mean, and again, I don't want to um, cap cap or belittle Colonial
no,
Pipeline,
that's
but
yeah,
for example, they did not have multi-factor authentication, so it wasn't even a hack. It was, I believe, it was phishing. So you fish a set of credentials without multi-factor. You've got the credentials. You just log back in. So as you were talking about, there are some low-hanging fruit items that, with that investment, again, can give you a lot of bang for your buck. Security awareness, multi-factor, keeping everything patched and keeping things up to date, doing some vulnerability scans, just some pretty basic hygiene. A lot of these companies are missing. Now, then you've got supply chain attacks again, like SolarWinds or Kaseya, and those are more complex. We've got a lot of people moving to the cloud. They're not configuring their cloud environment correctly. That leads to compromise. They're not configuring their applications or coding securely. That can lead to compromise. So there's still a lot of ways in, but we've got to make it a little bit harder for those threat actors.
definitely. And supply chain is a whole can of worms by itself. I think that requires its own set of regulatory and set of controls. I think first of all, the attack surface of supply chain is growing
Mhm.
as we speak because most organizations outsource the non-business essential functions to other companies. You as fintech, you may work with a potentially a smaller service provider that maybe on the surface, even from a monetary perspective, it's not a huge partner. You don't pay them a lot, but they might have absolutely critical data because of the nature of what they do. And then so visibility into what they do, whether it's as you mentioned, cloud provider or not, there's just so many moving parts. What do you see any solutions in that respect? Because it's almost impossible. Like you as an enterprise might have hundreds, if not thousands, of vendors at some point. What
Yeah.
is kind of and you probably don't have a crystal ball. This might be just a brainstorming question right here.
Yeah, yeah. This one, I wish I had that. This is absolutely what you should do, and then you're going to be fine. I what this really comes down to is third party risk.
Hmm.
So I more and more we are seeing security teams partnering with procurement. And I think that is a great idea. Procurement knows who you are partnering with because they're helping to sign the contracts, either that or legal. So understanding, number one, who you're partnered with, and then number two, what connections do they have? A lot of companies don't even realize that. And from there, then you can start looking at risk. Again, do you do access control reviews on them? Do you terminate access after you've terminated the contract? Just some pretty basic, again, in that. So I'll go back to the house. You
I
have,
love that.
you have a lawn service, you maybe have a maid service, you know, uh, what background do you have on these folks? Or do you have cameras on them when they're in your house and you're not there? Things like that, just really understanding that third parties are going to introduce risk. And also, this is the digital age. We are all connected. So it's just really understanding what connections they have, who has access, and managing that access can go a long way.
Yeah, and I think it's starts and ends with the culture of the organization, the people, and you as somebody who's spearheading that from a cybersecurity perspective has a lot to do with it. How do you instill that culture of being maybe not suspicious, maybe that's not the right word, but maybe cautious
Yep.
when dealing with, as you mentioned, and you have to be cautious with everybody. Don't trust everyone, even if they are a partner. How do you instill that with your colleagues and the people that you work with?
Yeah, so it's a fine line. I always joke that you want to have a user community that's bordering on paranoid. So you've got to that fine line between awareness and paranoia. I tell you what, we have a user community that is just so leery of clicking on anything now, but that's okay because the next thing is to be approachable. So our team spends a lot of time out with our user community. We are visible. We do, guest speaking at each other's team meetings. We do bulletins. We try to build in security as an everyday thing and not a once a year compliance event, and just showing people little by little so we don't overwhelm them either. And again, that's back to the FUD. So I try not to use too much FUD, but we just try to do little bits here and there as we go along. And it seems to settle better with our user community. So they're aware, again, tiny bit paranoid. That's a good thing. And just bringing in real life experiences, sharing headlines, talking about it. That's the one question that my board is always going to be asking me is, hey, we just read this in the Wall Street Journal. Are we at risk of that type of attack? So they want to know, is it relatable here at our company, our industry, our size, things like that. So yeah, just trying to kind of tie it all together because it's happening everywhere.
Yeah, it's so interesting that we starting to see that more and more. Even people like just everyday life, you see that the headlines are there. But then, and again, I think it's we're starting to seeing these more, and then people are less sensitive. It's almost like seeing like I remember like following the pandemic very closely the first few weeks, and then afterwards it's like, oh, meh, like, or it's a new strain, okay, whatever. So I think we're getting there in security as well, because it seems like there's just endless barrage of incidents, and yeah, some of them get coverage, but not all of them. And then we're getting almost desensitized to that kind of exposure, from executive as well, right?
Yeah, so we have to kind of be creative. So we try to use different techniques, surround sound. We had a really successful security awareness month where we had some games, online games and activities. And if you completed them, you got into a drawing for a nice gift card. So we just try to mix it up a little bit. And that way it keeps it fresh. But I agree, it can very quickly get desensitized. And again, especially as a CISO, if the sky is falling, you're gonna that Chicken Little story, and then people quit listening. So yeah, we have to. It's all a lot of balance. It's definitely tricky.
Yeah, and Jessica, the skies are not falling, right? I mean, you've been doing this for a while now, and there's always going to be threats. The non-existential. I mean, potentially if we get hacked, they overcome. It seems like everybody repeats. The Target. It was a big one. I went to Target the other day. I didn't even thought twice about it. Target still exists. If I think if it's flourishing. What are kind of the positive things you've seen that are, aside from you be able to tell everyone that you were a ballerina and not worrying about that?
Yeah, so I think one of the positives is our community. So that's one of the things that helped me build the program at the manufacturing company is just the community of cyber professionals locally within the Dallas Fort Worth area where I am right now, but nationally too, or internationally. We're talking to people even overseas now, and I'm really encouraged with some of the wins that we're seeing with FBI and the cyber task force around the United States, and with CISA, as part of the Department of Homeland Security. There are new regulations being proposed now with minimum requirements on security for critical infrastructure. So I think really as a nation and as a government, we're starting to look at this more coordinated than expecting company by company to be fighting cybercrime. And I'm really encouraged by that.
Yeah, absolutely. And you also mentioned that don't be afraid to ask for help, right? You had mentors, you are a mentor yourself. What is kind of the best way for people to reach out to you? Um, for advice, for insight, to get more of these speaking engagements. You're a wonderful speaker. What is the
Thank
best?
you.
What's the easiest way?
Yeah, and LinkedIn. I think I'm most active right now on LinkedIn. I try my best to answer everybody. I get a lot of messages each day, but I've made some really great connections on LinkedIn. I can also connect people to other cyber leaders. We really have a good online community, and there's so many opportunities like this and other webinars too that I encourage people to join and keep learning about our industry, keep meeting others. And I always say, if you do have a question, reach out and phone a friend. We shouldn't feel like we're alone in this fight at all.
Absolutely. We know the adversaries are collaborating. We should do too. So we should have a lifeline at any given moment to call someone and ask a question, whether it's a bad phone or not. Just to have somebody out there that can answer the question. So, Jessica, it's been a real pleasure to have you. I would love for you to come to New York City at some point. You probably will, since you're in fintech, and this is kind of the fintech central
Yeah,
New York City is. So hopefully we'll get to meet in person someday
I would
in the
love
next
that.
future events.
Yes.
Thank you again for taking the time to chat today, and much appreciated. And thank you all for joining. Stay
Thank you
safe, all.
so much, David. Thanks, guys.